Okay, perfect. So we are recording. And very quickly, just before we dive straight into sequencing stuff, does anybody have any questions with regard to teaching prep stuff for next week? Just very quickly, anybody, any questions? I didn't leave anybody else off the list. Been having nightmares about it. Everybody has a sequence to teach next week. Yeah. Okay. All right, perfect. And remember, the expectations for next week are exceptionally low. Next week, especially Wednesday, is just about finding your voice. That's all. So it's progress, not perfection. You don't have to worry about, I said the wrong thing. It's okay. You're going to say the wrong thing a lot, even once you're finished. So it's all good. And we all have funny things. Like I always talk about arm ankles when I get stuck and I can't think of wrists. So don't worry, you're going to have lots of weird stuff that comes out when you teach. It's all part of it. All right. So leading on from that, how has everybody been going with just their pose analysis? I know some of us kind of got a little bit ahead on Wednesday, starting to think about actual sequencing, getting stuck in, but just in terms of the analysis sheet that you had, did anybody have any major draws, any questions they want to ask, any check-ins with regards to poses? I know I've chatted to a few of you the last day or so. Questions, concerns, comments? Anybody online?
I have, it's not about the pose, it's the individual pose analysis. I added it to the bottom of my Word that I'm going to send to you. Is that correct? Must we add it in for you?
It's fine, yeah, that's great. And that's most, you're not going to be marked on that. That's just for kind of your own interest and our own interest. Yeah.
Okay. All right, thank you.
That's great, but it will be interesting for me to be able to see how you guys feel about the poses that you've chosen and where you think sort of your own physicality sits.
What was the question?
So the question was your personal pose analysis, your individual pose analysis on page 34. There's some questions in terms of you thinking about yourself doing your peak pose. And just some sort of answers. You can do the pose already, you can't do the pose yet, which is absolutely fine. And then just thinking about your own body, making that shape in terms of flexibility, strength, skill, and anything else. Yeah, so it's an interesting thought experiment for you, and it will be interesting for us to be able to see that as well. So if you're happy to include it, that would be great. Anything else? Anybody else online in the room? Any other questions? We will come back to those pages in a bit before we kind of move on. But if there's anything that's come up. No, everyone is good. Very quiet today. Okay. All right, so today we're going to start taking our baby steps towards creating our sequence. All right. At this stage, we're not going to particularly concern ourselves with transitions. All right. So don't worry too much about this is how I'm going to flow this thing into this thing. All right. For today, I want us to just think about the main body of our sequence, the main chunk of it, and that's going to be between 14 and 16 poses-ish. Yeah, you might find that you want to add a couple more, or if there's a lot of complexity, if you've chosen a pose that is like way up here on the like skill, strength, flexibility scale, like we talked about a bit on Wednesday, if your peak pose has a high flexibility, high strength, high skill rating, for instance, so it's an all-round very complex pose, your prep poses are going to start at a much higher level than if your peak pose is slightly less complex. Does that make sense to everybody? Yeah. So if you're doing, trying to think of a good example. One arm crow, which is quite a lot of skill, quite a lot of strength, not so much flexibility, then it does exist. We had some great. I'm not just making it up, guys. It exists. All right, so it's doing crow with one arm balancing on your elbow, and the other leg, one arm balancing on your elbow, one leg, one knee balancing on your elbow, on your shelf, and the other leg floats up and back behind you. Yeah. So it definitely exists. You can find a picture when we have a break. That takes a lot of strength and quite a bit of skill to find the tipping point in your balance. So you're not going to be starting with a million lunges. I don't know why you do lunges for that pose anyway, bad example. But you know, you're going to start not at a basic baseline. Yeah, so you have to adjust where you're sequencing kind of the on-ramp is according to where you're going to end up. Yeah. Okay, so today we're going to be thinking about the meat of your sequencing meal. I'm full of bad analogies today. All right, so this is the juicy, chunky part. All right, so it's between 14 and 16 poses that makes that up. Don't worry about warming up and don't worry about cooling down. All right. Jumping around a little bit, but keep thinking about your poses as being progressive. Just like everything we've learned so far, one builds onto the next, builds onto the next, builds onto the next. Yeah, you're working progressively for strength and for flexibility. We also want to think about positional situations. So as much as I said, don't think about the transitions, you do need to think about where am I starting and where am I ending up. So you don't want to be doing, I'm doing crow on my back, then I need to jump up and I need to be in warrior 2. And then I need to go down to Malasana and do crow on the floor. And then I need to sit down and do crow. It just to make sense of the sequence. So if you're starting from supine, then you work your way to seated, then you work your way to kneeling, then you work your way to standing, kind of generally is the flow. You might not want to start supine, you might want to start seated. You might want to start standing for your particular pose. And then work things in, that you don't want to be up and down and sit down and stand up and sit down and stand up and sit down. Yeah, it makes sense. You'd get lost in the sequence and all your students would get lost in it as well. Brenda, sorry, you've got a question.
Just is pose 14 or 16, is that going to be our peak pose? So we just work up to the peak pose and then we kind of stop for the sequence now.
So yes, for today, yeah. So that 14 to 16 poses will lead you to your peak pose. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
And then when you're thinking about your 14 to 16 poses, high mountain and child's pose don't count as poses. So don't stick loads of those in and say, oh, it's 2 of mine and 16 poses are done. All right, so high mountain, child's pose don't count. And also similar poses that kind of lead into each other. So if you're going from lunge to revolve lunge, count that as one. Yeah, the lunge and revolve lunge aren't two. So if you have a couple of linked poses that all belong to the same family, that makes sense, count it as one. Don't count it as two or three.
I know we're doing this because we're going to get tested on it, but when we go out into teaching, do you always just use 14 to 16, or can you vary it depending on how long the class is?
It depends on what you're teaching as well.
Okay.
Yeah. So don't.
This is not like set in stone, this is how it always is.
The number is a guide.
Okay, cool.
Okay.
And
Don't
how long
panic
is
too much about it.
class? Like how long would 16
So
pose to your peak pose?
your kind of 14 to 16 poses leads you to about the 30-minute-ish mark. I'm going to go through a kind of breakdown of your class now. But yeah, it will lead you to about the halfway point, maybe just over the halfway point to your peak pose. And then that gives you time to workshop your peak pose, and then also gets you time to get people out of it, cool down, and trust. Yeah, cool. Do add in, bless you, do add in your relevant arm movements and also spine movements if you're warming up your back for your pose and you happen to be in a lunge and want to add a lateral stretch because you need it for your peak pose, then mention that. Yep. So any relevant arm movements or spine movements, add those in. For instance, if your peak pose is taking your shoulders into extension, then perhaps you have a humble warrior where you draw the arms back, or maybe even just a high lunge where you draw the arms down and back. You want to include that information for us so we can see that, because it's part of it. Yeah. And it is part of that specific pose in your sequence.
Amy,
Yes.
quick question. I've taken your suggestion on the sage pose.
Mhm.
So would it be ideal, because it's kind of similar to crow as like an arm balance, but would you recommend not including crow in the sequence leading up to sage pose? Because is it too tiring, or what would you kind of recommend for that leading up to the peak pose?
That's a really good question, Nicholas. I think it depends on how much you're going to do. So if perhaps because you want to build, and that's actually what I was getting to next, is you want to start building your skill work into your sequence as well. So if, for instance, you're doing an arm balance, you'll want to start introducing concepts of drishti, of focus, of looking where you're going, and of leaning as part of your sequence as well. But having said that, you don't want to get to the point where you get to your peak pose and everyone is absolutely exhausted. So there are different ways that you can approach it. So I think for sage, you will probably enter through a side crow. You can add inside crow, and you might not need to get people to do full side crow, but you might want to use it for your skills kind of moment, right? So if you're in your side crow shape, you can always say, place the hands to the floor, find your shelf, so elbow to knee, elbow to hip, and then look forward, lean forward, but keep the feet on the floor. Yeah, so there's kind of ways to get around it without pushing into the full expression of the pose. And you might find that for something as potentially challenging as sage pose, maybe your side crow is your regression option if somebody doesn't want to or can't quite get to that sage pose with the legs extended shape.
Yeah, okay, cool, thanks.
Okay.
Makes sense.
Pleasure. Any questions in the room about that? And I might be already jumping ahead to kind of what we're going to be dealing with on Monday in terms of modification, progression, regressions. But does that make sense to everybody? That you can start to think about shapes and skills and bring them in without having to tire your people out completely. And the last sort of tip or hint is to balance your sequence, which sort of also comes into that idea of tiring people out. And you don't want to be doing twist after twist after twist after twist after twist after twist after twist. Peak pose has a twist. Some twist, but balance it out. Or if you're doing something standing balance, you don't want to be doing warrior two, Ardha Chandrasana, half moon, revolved Ardha Chandrasana. It's not going to be conducive to a well-balanced class. That standing leg is going to get super tired and people are going to be exhausted before you've even got to where you're going. Yeah. Okay. And then just a general guide for your class structure, particularly when we're talking about peak pose sequencing, is the idea that you have a few minutes to ground and begin the class. So you might want to take 2 to 3 minutes. Maybe it's seated, maybe it's in Shavasana, maybe a little bit of breathing, however you want to kind of enter the space and bring people together. Then you have your warm-up section, which is about 5-ish minutes. And that's a good space to do if you're doing supine poses to kind of start getting into things. Then you have the body of your class, which is what we're looking at today, your sort of 14 to 16-ish poses. And generally a good guide is about 3 flows. I don't know why it works, but it does. So about 3 flows-ish of those poses, kind of progressively getting bigger, more challenging, depending on how you are thinking about things. And that takes about 30 minutes. Then you hit your peak pose at around 35-ish minutes maybe. And then that gives you a good chunk of time to be able to workshop your peak pose. So particularly for this example that you guys are going to be working on for yourselves, you want to be able to give yourself time to be able to get people into the shape. So unless you're teaching advanced practitioners doing Nicholas's sage pose, there might be people who've never heard of sage pose, don't know what it looks like, don't know where they are in space, don't know how to make up. You want to give yourself enough time to be able to teach your peak pose and not just say, okay, ta-da, sage pose, off you go, and then done. Yeah. So that gives you enough time, and then it gives you enough time to have a decent cool down and a final Shavasana to complete your hour. And it's funny, timing is a thing that kind of comes with practice. Yeah. So things are going to shift according to your pacing, your style, how quickly you speak, for instance, is also going to affect how you structure and pace your classes. But at the moment, this is kind of more of a just getting into it, creating something, and then you've got something to work on. Any questions?
Amy, can you repeat which poses you said weren't counted in the sequence?
So not high mountain and not child's pose.
Okay, and if we have a downward dog as like a resting pose?
That doesn't count either. I would say that doesn't
Okay.
count. Otherwise, it's
Okay.
going to eat up your poses and your, yeah.
Yeah,
So,
okay.
yeah. And we're not worrying about transitions. So for instance, flowing through a vinyasa, don't worry about putting it in and it doesn't count for the sake of this. Okay. So before we get going on our example, the poses that we've chosen, we're going to go through an example. Let me just share my screen. In fact, let me, yeah.
Sorry,
Yes.
is a like a three-legged dog, knee to nose, knee to elbow, knee to tricep, knee to tricep? Is that counted?
I would leave that as a transitional
So,
thing.
Just as and that's good. for
Yeah.
one? That's good.
Yeah, depending on where you're putting it. For instance, it depends on your pose as well. If, for instance, you were doing, let me just close my screen share. If you were doing something like Herbert's pose, where you are in your arm balance in a split, so one leg is over your front shoulder and the other leg is floating back, you can enter that pose from three-legged dog and then squeeze the knee up and over and go straight into it that way. So if that was the way that you were particularly sequencing for that pose, then maybe I would include it in the progression, that kind of squeeze.
Yeah.
Find maybe from your, because then you can turn it into something else where you squeeze forward. Oh, my arms are too short. Ugh. Find the squeeze, then find the extension, then find the push back. So that would be slightly different, but just in terms of that float and rock sensation, it's a transitional thing, don't worry about it. Yeah. So unless it's actually like meaningful,
Yeah.
then don't worry about that. For today, yeah. Yeah. Any questions from online kind of following on from that? All good? Okay, perfect. I'm going to share my screen. We're going to quickly work through an example. Then we'll have a little break. And then we will get going. All right. Hope this works. Okay. Good. Online, can you all see my screen? Yeah, perfect. Good. Sometimes it likes to work and sometimes it doesn't. So. Okay, and all of the stuff that we've gone through today is in your overview. All right, so this is our revolved half moon example. We've already gone through all of this stuff. So the main movement is hip flexion, final rotation, and the back leg is in the action of extension. We need to be flexible / stretch our hamstrings, adductors, and a little bit of spinal rotation. What's going to get tired? Our standing leg, and maybe the back leg eventually as well, if we're going, lifting that back leg up. Our skill comes down to balance. So thinking about things like drishti, focus, where we're looking, turning the head as you rotate, etc. And then the rating has come out: flexibility about a 3, strength about a 2, tire about a 2, and skill also about a 2. So this is your template, guys. Page 36, yeah. Yeah, sorry, everybody online, you're page 36. But you've got it up on the screen, so don't stress too much, but it is there. You're going to use this as your template. So for this example, we've started with, and you'll see here at the top it says pose/movement. So if it's something that is not quite an entire yoga posture of its own thing, then still you can put it in. It, you know, it's still part of it. So we've started lying head to knee pose, stretch and side lying triangle and twist. So that's on our backs, nose to our knee, little stretch for the hammies, and then maybe finding that kind of triangle shape, maybe revolve, half moon shape on the floor. And you're going to say what the main movement is, what you're stretching or what you're strengthening, and if you're adding any skill work in. Then it's moved on, butterfly, seated, we're going to add a twist. So the main movement is the twisting, adductors in your butterfly, maybe a bit of core strength. Okay, seated head to knee pose and wide-legged head to knee pose. So you can see how here's where we get into our like pose family group things together. Yeah, so we haven't separated out seated head to knee and the wide-legged head to knee pose. We've kept them as one. Compass pose, and compass without holding on, so using the strength of the leg to hold it up. Then we start moving to all fours. You can see there's no transitions here. Low lunge with a twist into standing split. So we've grouped those two. All the actions, what's stretching, what's working, and what the skill is. So that makes sense in terms of finding your low lunge. I'm not on the screen, yes I am. Low lunge, standing split. I'm having to draw the leg up to the sky and stretching the hamstring of the standing leg, finding maybe a little bit of balance, finding the active extension of the back leg. Yep. So starting to add some stuff together. Tree into a twisted tree helps with balance, but it's not as tiring as, say, warrior. Yep. Then we move to warrior 3. So it's progressive. Next jump up. Then we've got triangle pose, which is going to keep working the hip flexion, and it's making that same leg shape. Stretching into the adductor. Then we move into half moon. So it's another balance for our skills. It's a similar shape. And we're getting the action of the back leg extending. We're stretching the front hammies. Revolve triangle, which is a very similar shape to your peak pose, but you're not balancing. So you're finding the twist, finding the lift, stretching, finding the flexion through the hips, but without having to balance. Goddess pose, add it in for a bit of adductor stretching. Utthita Hasta Padangusthasana, and also the revolved version. So taking your leg out, then maybe bringing it back and swapping into the revolved version, which is basically the same as your peak pose, but it's in a slightly different iteration. Yeah, so you can start thinking about not just actions, but also shapes. Shapes are super helpful. How can I make the shape in a slightly different way? How can I make it slightly easier so that it works progressively to my peak pose? So I think being upright in Utthita Hasta with the twist is a lot easier to balance than when you've got your long lever behind you and you're trying to twist in the opposite direction. Yeah, but it's a very, very similar shape in the same way that we can do it. Yeah, so we could do this, which is a very similar shape to when you're then standing in your revolved half moon. You've got the hip flexion, got the one leg extending up. It's similar. It's doing the same thing. Okay.
So Amy,
Really?
would you mind going, sorry, to the very top just for a second? I just missed it. My internet keeps cutting out. Just number 1.
That's okay. Number 1 is lying head to knee pose and side lying triangle with a twist.
So Amy, when
Yes.
we think through the 14 to 16 poses, should we think of it in a way of it flowing, or should we be thinking about it in a way of like what is being worked in each pose? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Yeah. And I think in truth, Marcel, it's sort of a little bit of both. Like we talked about earlier, we don't want to be on the floor, standing on our feet, sitting down on the mat, and then standing up again, and then lying down again. So you want to think of it in terms of flow that way. But for right now, you don't have to worry about exactly how you're going to link the poses together. That's your transitions, and we'll still come to that.
Oh, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Sorry, Brenda, yes.
What I wanted to ask now, like you said, and maybe I'm jumping the gun, and just tell me if I am. So we have our 15 poses here, but you said it has, what did I write down? 3 flows that progress. Is
Yeah,
this
but
one flow, or aren't we there yet?
no, this is just your poses. So you don't have to, sorry, I was just giving you an overview of kind of like a good
Okay.
structure for a class.
Okay, so I mustn't
Yeah.
even think of the 3 flows now. Just
Don't
this is
worry
one
about the
flow.
3 flows. Don't
Okay.
worry about how to get from exactly one pose to the next pose. That's all transition work.
Okay.
Don't worry about moving through sun salutations. You're just thinking about poses today.
Just similar poses
Yeah.
to the peak pose, from easy to more difficult.
Progressive poses that build to your peak pose.
Thank you.
Yeah. Does that make sense? Is everyone in the room also okay with that? Yeah. So don't stress about how am I going to link this and how is it going to look and how is it going to. We really just want to see the. That's so that we know that you understand the idea of progressive stretching / strengthening. Yeah. And how to start building skill as well at the same time. And then you can see we get to our peak pose around number 15, revolved half moon. And then we've also added in what modifications could we offer? So how could we make it maybe a little bit easier? Could we use a wall? Could we use a block? Could we offer maybe a slight alternative? Could we make it harder? So they've said here, float the hand off the floor. So that's progressing it, not regressing it. So those are things that you can think about, but it's not important for today. All right, we just literally want to be thinking about these 16 poses and how they progressively make the body ready for the peak pose. But you can use this template for your work, so you can copy and paste it into your own document. I'm going to stop my screen share now. Any questions before I do? Does anybody want to see anything on the screen? No, all good? Okay, perfect. I'll stop that. There we go. And then what we'll eventually get to is our cool down section, which is about 6 to 8 poses. And your cool down generally are movements that are kind of neutral or slightly opposite to what you've been doing through the whole class. So if you're teaching, if your peak pose has a twist, you don't want to cool down with more twists. But it's just to give the body movement in different directions. It's not about undoing movements or like neutralizing so your body is balanced, or because that's not the way bodies work. All right, so it's just to move in all different directions so the body kind of feels that sense of having moved in different ways and not just twist, or that bend. Yeah.
So for example, like if your pose is like is mostly hamstring, then you're building up your hamstring. To cool down with like 1 or 2 quad stretches, or will you just do like very calm neutral pose?
So you could do. So the question was if your pose, if your peak pose is all about hip flexion and stretching hamstrings, would you kind of do the opposite? So would you do like quad stretching at the end? I think it slightly depends on your pose. So if it's something that is, and people might have different opinions to me as well, but if you're doing something, for instance, where you're using your quads sort of in a very active way, in that action of hip flexion, then yeah, I think some quad stretching would feel really nice. You could also perhaps think about working hamstrings in a shorter range. So if you've been forward folding, lengthening, working in a long range, not lengthening, working in a long range, then maybe as part of your cool down, you would like to add in something like bridge pose, which is a nice, calm, finishing off pose. But in the action of it, you're lifting your hips and you're working your hamstrings in a slightly different way. You might want to choose bridge pose as part of your cool down because you've been doing twist after twist after twist, and it feels nice to find a little bit of spinal extension. So the same pose can have slightly different parts, slightly different reasons. It's all really work and give you that rounding off at the end of your class. But I generally think about the cool down is kind of coming back down to your mat and then moving into Shavasana. That's helpful for me. Other people might think that slightly differently as well. Yeah, but that's my answer. Any questions about that from anybody online? No. Good. All right. Excellent. And then just to say that you have various examples in your chunky manual as well. This is the manual. Hey, that's the overview. This is the manual. Yes, got it right this time. So as well as all of your progressive pictures that we looked at the other day from page 191, I think it was. No, even before that, 180 something. 183, there we go. You've got all of your kind of progressive pictures that are going to be really helpful, so you can refer back to them. And then there are also some sequencing examples at the back as well, and sort of thinking of the kind of pose analysis as well. So there's examples in the manual as well. There's also a whole section on transition, but don't go there. I don't know why I even said it. Don't worry about going there, not today. All right, but there's lots of stuff that will help you in your manual as well. Any questions? No? Is this feeling quite daunting, or is it feeling like, oh, okay? Or somewhere in between?
It's like excited.
Excited but nervous. Good. You know, I think the reason that I always come back to peak post sequencing is, and I think I said this to some of you online the other day, is it makes sense. To me, it's kind of a very logical way of going about things. We are using our anatomical knowledge to be able to create sequences to get people into all of the weird and wonderful shapes that we want to get into in the yoga space. And I use this for sequencing every day.
I find transition, getting from one pose into the other, more difficult. So I have these 46 poses all written down
Yeah,
and put them into an order, so they're building up nicely.
Yeah.
Now I'm thinking, okay, I'm here, and how can I get the next?
to the next thing. So Seb was just saying, I don't know if you heard online about the idea of like the 14 to 16 poses kind of makes sense. And then the idea of how you're going to put them together is like a little bit very bad paraphrasing. Sorry, Seb. So, and it can be a bit daunting to sort of think, oh my word, how am I going to get this person from this to that to this to that? And for today, you don't have to worry about it. I think we will get more into the transition side of things next week. And also transitions don't have to be exceptionally complex. They can be wonderful and creative and funky and dancey, and they can be whatever you want them to be, but they also don't have to be super duper complex where you're kind of working your way around your mat and twisting one side and then twisting the other side and jumping around. And so you can keep it very simple and still have a really lovely sequence to teach and work through. Last call for questions. All good. Okay, in the room, anybody? No? Okay, it's 10 to 4. Let's come back at 4 o'clock. Yep, so quick bathroom break or whatever it is you need, caffeine break. And I'll see you in 10 minutes. Cool, perfect. Resume. Sorry, I should have been recording that question. So Marcel was asking, for instance, if she has in her sequence a situation where she, say, in Happy Baby and then extending one leg and then extending the other leg and then going into a supine pigeon, does that get linked as one, or do you separate it out? And I sort of said to her, I keep the Happy Baby leg extension as one thing. Maybe if the intention for the supine pigeon is slightly different, it's a slightly different shape, I'd keep that separate. And then she asked, what about if you go from that into figure 4 and then back to Happy Baby? That becomes transitional. Yeah, so once you have your pose in once, for this exercise, it's just about that one pose. And then I want to see what the action is. Let me have a look at this, at the template for what exactly. So I want to see the main movement, what the intention is for either stretching or strengthening, and what the skill is. And there might not always be a skill, and there might not always be both stretch and strength, but there might be one or the other. So really filling in your template on page 36. And super, super important is make sure that your poses relate to the main movements that came from your pose analysis that we did on Wednesday. Yeah, so if your pose is all about hip flexion and hamstring flexibility, you're not going to be adding crow into your sequence, because it doesn't make any sense. Unless for some reason it really does. But it's unlikely. Marcel, did you have a question? I saw a hand.
Oh no, I was just putting the hand down.
Oh, you were just putting the hand down. Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Did you have a question? No, it was just a.
Any-
Okay.
So Amy, so if I'm doing Fallen Angel, can I do from downward dog, go into three-legged downward dog, stacking hips, then come forward into plank, bringing knee to nose to work on hip opening and arm strength?
Yes, but I would say that's also almost more transitional, Emily.
So transition from what, a three-legged downward dog, and then do the, as part of the three-legged downward dog, do the knee to nose into plank as like a sequence in that section. And then could I then go into three-legged dog into plank, into one-legged chaturanga push-up, and then back, or not? So
Yeah, so I would kind of, for this exercise, sort of separate things out a little bit more. I just want them, like the main pose that's part of your like 16 pose.
So should I put, so if I do say number one, three-legged downward dog, and then I put in there knee to nose and one-legged chaturanga push-ups from plank, and put that as number one, and then say go into number two, standing split.
Yes, so you could say
Okay.
three-legged dog is one of your poses. For
Yep.
instance, say, okay, so that's about getting that back leg into the action of extension, because
Yeah.
your final pose has the action of extending. And then standing split is a progression of that, so you can take that separately. But don't worry about the
Put writing
transition,
down.
like the knee to nose and the planks and stuff. That is
Okay.
transition.
So do I not need to write any of that stuff down? I just need to do the basics, like that, say the three-legged downward dog, standing split, like, I don't know, the warrior three or something like that. Would that work?
Keep it simple, yeah.
All right.
So that
Thank
each,
you. Okay.
yeah, and each pose must be intentional. So it
Yeah,
has
building on.
final pose.
Okay. And not too many arm balances, you said, with it being quite heavy on the arms. So would things like warrior three, or how do you say that, leaned over warrior three? You know, like it's not straight, it's more at an angle. So
Sort of
you're not,
somewhere between standing split and warrior three.
yeah,
Yeah,
where
side
you've got
angle.
more work on the core, where obviously when you're going into the pose, you want to sort of be building core, but not too much on the arms. So I thought that might be a good pose. Or would it not?
Yeah, it could be. It could be, definitely. I think, yeah, just thinking about your shape as well, because I think Fallen Angel also comes from a side crow.
Because I was going to put some twisted crows in towards, like, just before.
It will be right towards the end, yeah.
Yeah.
And then also thinking for you, Emily, because that extended leg, I'm coming to you now, Brenda, sorry. The extended leg isn't coming from straight, right? It's not going straight up like this. It's coming from here and then going up. It's like unfolding. So how could you add in that action as opposed to, say, sweeping the leg back into three-legged dog? So it's
Because that's where I was thinking about the knee to nose, where you you're in a three-legged dog and then you move forward into plank and bring with the leg knee to nose to get that sort of out and in motion, or that, or even the.
keep coming back to your final shape. So potentially, sorry, this is
Sorry.
quite specific, but keep thinking about your final shape. So it might be more instead of, I don't know if you can see me, it might be better instead of thinking about this action, to think about from standing split into a curtsy and then lift up. That might be more
Doing a
relevant
curtsy squat.
than
So that would
than
then come in.
the leg.
So that would then come in after the standing split. Then but would I be able to say that as separate, or would that be part of the standing split, the curtsy squats? Because if that's transitional, or is it separate?
I would possibly make that separate because it has its own intention. But also, if you're running out of poses, then you can group that together.
Okay.
Or you can
So
also
just-
put, standing split and then progressing to curtsy squat, extending to standing split.
Okay. All right. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. Brenda.
Hi. So I watched Catherine's video on, because my pose is full dancer, and I watched a video that she made on the website. And
Hello.
something quite interesting that
Just watching in the also.
advanced pose. So it being a very advanced pose, I must use, or she suggested in the video, when you do the sequencing, you use like intermediate poses, so still very strong poses. Will that be okay? Because now,
Yeah,
like,
definitely.
the poses she, I don't know why I'm struggling to talk today. The poses she suggested was, well, splits, king pigeon, wheel, and then pyramid, kind of like pyramid to start out with, to stretch the hammies and stuff like that. But isn't that a bit too much? Or
So remember, if you need to sequence according to where your peak pose ends up, right? So like we were talking about earlier, the idea of the more challenging your peak pose, the higher your starting point.
okay, so
because if you're doing gentle sort of pyramids and wild thing and having a very nice time, you're not going to be able to get into full dancer.
Okay, so
I
can throw the poses in then. Like, I just wanted to double check with you, and I'm sure Catherine is for this, but it just felt like a bit overwhelming in the sense
that's
of,
fine. I understand. And that comes back to grading your pose according to, okay, if crow is a 5 or a 4, in terms of like our challenge rating, then full dancer is going to be like an 8 or a 9. Because think about what the pose is. It's a standing balance with a back bend, with huge amounts of shoulder flexion, holding the back foot, all whilst balancing.
okay.
Yeah, so it's up there. So you can't start, there goes the electricity, you can't start too easy because you're not going to get there.
Okay.
So if your peak pose is like a 9, 10, then you can't start at 1. You're going to
Okay.
have to start at 5 and then work
So-
up.
Okay, in my mind now, just to throw it out,
Oh,
like.
hang on a
start with-
second. Sorry, you're still attached to the TV. I can't hear you, and I
Oh, okay.
lost the. Okay, there we go. Now you're back.
All right, so I would think now in my mind, just tell me if I'm in the right direction. Start out with a pyramid, then do a bit of a lateral thing in the pyramid, lateral stretches, you know, walking your hands to the left and to the right in pyramid. And then like after that, go into down dog, 3-legged dog, wild thing, and then go into like all the bigger poses after that. So that's like the 2, okay. All right.
Yeah.
That's
You
gonna
want
be
to
too
start at a
conservative.
higher level. Yeah.
Yes.
So
Okay, and
your
then
wild thing is not going to be your prep pose for your peak pose. It's going to be like one of your warm-up poses.
individual poses. Yes. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
If
I
that's
understand now a bit better.
and I can't reiterate this enough, go back to the final shape. Shapes are so helpful to start getting you to think of creative ways of getting bodies into those spaces and places without necessarily having to do the full extent of it, without having to have a full balance, without having to have your full weight on your arms, for instance. Yeah. So go back to shapes. Think progressively. I think what we need to do is I'm going to need you to start filling in your template. I'm going to walk around the room. I will come back to online. And then you can ask me kind of individual questions. But kind of let go of the idea of any kind of transition. Think about anything that's involved in a vinyasa as a transition. So don't worry about those guys because they will come in anyway. How are you going to get your body ready? What needs to be stretched? Do you need to build strength? What skills do you need? Yeah. So Brenda's example of full dancer, we can all shout it out, right? One hip is in extension. What do we need to stretch for hip extension? Quads. Yeah. How are we going to do it? Quickly, efficiently. We need to find spinal mobility. We don't want to be doing back bend, back bend, back bend, back bend, blah, blah, blah. How are we going to find a bit of mobility to get us going and then find extension? How are we going to build our flexibility in our shoulders so that we have the range to be able to reach the hands back and pick up our foot at the back? Yeah. What do you need? And don't get bogged down in details. Yeah. I know it's super hard because we're already at the point where we want things to be pretty and we want things to flow. We don't need to do it today. We want the like ugly truth today, nothing pretty. Yeah, just the foundation, just the bedrock, just the important stuff. Don't worry about the pretty flouncy stuff on the top. Yeah. Okay. All right, online. I'm going to mute from this side so you don't have everybody's noise from the side, and then I'm going to come back to you shortly. Is that okay? Does anybody have any questions before I do that? Okay. All right, perfect. Hello, everybody online. I'm just going to take that up because of the electricity. I'm going to take you guys outside, but quiet. How are you all doing? Do you have some questions for me?
For the main movement, must we just put like, for instance, I have like kneeling arm stretches. So like you would just kneel and then we could do like up or like half face and stuff like half face arms and stuff like that.
In terms of as on the template?
Yes.
Okay, so let me
So-
just escape from here. So where it says,
Main
Sorry, I'm
movement.
just- so where it says main movement, you're thinking about your joint movements, Haley.
So must I just put hip flexion, even though that's not really why I'm going into the pose?
So you need to put in, sorry, I'm just going to minimize here. So you need to put in what the main joint movement of the pose is, so that I know why you're including that pose. So if for
Okay.
instance, you're doing your end pose is full dancers pose, and you've included a low lunge with a quad stretch, reaching the hand back and stretching the quad. So I've bent my knee and I've squeezed my heel up towards my hip, and I've caught my foot behind me and I'm stretching my quad. Then I need you to say there, hip extension,
Or quad?
and it's stretching quads,
So you
and
wouldn't include
if it has
the,
anything else attached to it.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I need to be able to see that you know why you're doing a movement and
Because
what
I'm
part
doing,
is going to be working.
so because I'm doing my handstand, right? So I'm doing like the kneeling arm stretches just so that you're not like sitting, like if you're cross-legged, like sometimes it doesn't feel so nice to do like stretches with your arms. So that's why I chose kneeling arm stretches. But so then it would be main movement would be like shoulder extension, but then must I still include hip flexion because your hips are in flexion, but it's not what I'm focusing on.
Just the major action of why you're in the pose. So the fact that you're kneeling is irrelevant,
Okay.
but it's the fact that you're working not shoulder extension, but shoulder
Flexion.
flexion. Remember, shoulder extension is back behind you.
Oh no, okay, yeah. Okay, no, I wrote it down correctly. I just didn't say it correctly. And then I was
That's
like, oh
okay,
my
that's
God.
right.
Okay.
It's confusing. It's a super confusing one. So yeah, so if you're doing work for shoulder flexion, see, I nearly did it there. For shoulder flexion, then that's fine. The whole reason you're doing that pose or that
Okay.
move is for shoulder flexion. That's what I want to know. I'm not interested in it because they're not really relevant.
Okay, cool.
So yeah, so if you're in a seat or something else that's not really why you're there, then don't worry about telling me about that. Just worry about giving me the really relevant, the meaty stuff.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Cool. Lana.
Amy,
Yes.
this is hectic.
Oh,
No, I don't know, because I'm confused because you said like if you're doing a back bend, don't do too many back bends. And then you said add a wheel into your, because I'm doing the full dancer, same as Brenda.
Yeah.
I mean, a full wheel for me would be a peak pose. Adding
Yeah.
that to my sequence would be major.
yeah. But don't worry about you, worry about the pose. I know it's easy for me to say, and it's really difficult when you're working with poses that aren't maybe something that naturally like fits with your body, with your practice right now. But yeah, don't worry about you, just worry about your peak pose.
So how
How
many
you
should you add? I mean, can you do a bow and a wheel? Or is that too many?
No, that would be fine. And then how do you get the rest of the action? Think of the final shape. So what might be more efficient than doing, say, your floor bow? Because both arms there are reaching back into extension, right? Where are your arms in your full dancer?
Inflection.
They're in flexion. Can you think of another back bend that's maybe on the where you take your arms into flexion?
A pigeon. The pigeon with the,
See, so you've got it.
yeah, but those are advanced. I'm like freaking out. I mean, I'll be dead by the time I get
That's
to
fine. Don't worry, you're not doing the sequence.
Okay.
You're not going to have to show us. You're not going to have to demonstrate it.
I'm just gonna try to kill other people.
That's the joy of being a teacher. Didn't anybody tell you that?
Yeah, it sounds great.
Kidding. But yeah, think about the shapes for the final pose. We want to be anatomically efficient, right? So yeah, bow is a really nice floor-based back bend, but it's not giving you exactly what you need for your final pose. But there are other options on the floor that's getting you into a very similar shape without having to worry about the balance.
Okay.
Yeah. So
And
for
a
instance,
camel, adding a camel in there also too much then. I mean, 16 poses is a lot.
you can add a camel in,
Okay.
and then that would be about obviously the spine extension and maybe a little bit of sort of your quad stretchiness. But again, are there more efficient ways to do that? Think of the final shape. So you're standing on one leg, you've got one leg backward and one leg that you're standing on and the other leg that's reaching back into extension. Whereas in camel, both hips are in extension, so you can definitely add it in.
Okay.
But there might be other ways that you can approximate the shape better.
On one leg.
So for instance, in a lunge.
Yeah,
I
I
would
got
say
that. I got a
maybe
line
quad-
with a camel.
You know, quad stretching with a lunge or working. I'm giving you guys all the answers.
Yeah.
Working into a lunge with a quad stretch, and instead of pulling the back leg, kind of reaching the arms up and overhead. So you're also getting shoulder flexion. You know, think of shapes. Think of the geometry is where
Okay.
I would keep going back to. So is this a similar shape? Am I stretching what needs to be stretched? / am I strengthening what needs to be strengthened? Although, you know, full dance, it's a flexibility pose. Your strength is like a 1. If you can stand on one leg, then you got it, you know,
Yeah.
in terms of strength. But flexibility is huge. So am I making sure that I'm also finding the sort of stretch for the hammies of the standing leg, because there's a bit of stretch going on there. Keep going back to the shape. Sorry, Marcel's had her hand up for ages.
Thank
Sorry,
you, very
Marcel.
much, Amy.
Pleasure. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, thank you.
Right.
I have 2 questions. The
Mhm.
first one is with the table in the top, I just want to, okay, I'll take you through. So in my main movements, my pose is flying pigeon, and I have a lot in the main movement. So am I thinking that everything is a main movement? So what I've put down is there's a hip external rotation in the front leg. you do a hip extension in order to take the leg back to get it into neutral. Then I said you have abductors in your hamstrings to work that external rotation because, you know, it's like opening up your legs. And then you have a knee extension, chaturanga. You kind of have a curved spine a lot of the time is in order for you to lean forward. And then I also put a hooked foot.
Okay, you've got a lot of detail there, Marcel, which is great. So don't worry really about knee extension. It's, you know, knee extension, we can all do it. So we don't have to really worry about it because it's not something that we need to prep bodies for. So things like extending elbows and extending knees, don't worry, because we can all get to like the range of what's required with in terms of that. Think about the major stuff. So for your flying pigeon, yes, you're right. The front hip is in external rotation.
Yeah.
The back hip is the action of extension,
Yeah.
but it's not really hip extension because the body is pretty much in one line. Yeah, when you find your seesaw, you end up being in one line. There's maybe a mild amount of spinal flexion, like you said, because of the kind of lean and finding your shelf. And you can say chaturanga arms. That's enough.
Okay, so hook foot is too much. Okay, cool. And the extension is too much. Got it.
Just
Then-
the main, and like the arms, like that's relevant. And then the skill is your lean, right?
Yeah. Oh, so the only skill is leaning,
Is you're creating your shelf, hooking
creating
your
the
foot,
shelf and hooking the foot and looking up.
and looking
leaning
forward, leaning forward.
Okay. Okay, and then what will be strong or what will tire? I know that the arms are a lot in this one, but because the leg is extended up and back, I also said that could tire. Is that true?
I mean, eventually, if you do lots and lots and lots and lots, but the major thing is, I would say, is your arms.
Okay,
That's
clear.
really, that's where is the most amount of effort. So if you think about strength is where force needs to be produced, there is a little force that needs to be produced to lift the back leg, but a lot of that comes in with your kind of tilt, your sort of seesaw shape helps to get that leg up.
Okay.
So really,
And then
the force comes from where?
I don't know, from the lean on your arms.
From your arms. So that's what needs to be strong. That's what's going to get tired.
Perfect. My last question. So, one of the things I have is like bringing the knees up into the chest and maybe doing hip circles. But to me, that also feels kind of like a downward dog or, like a transition.
Yeah, that's like warm-up stuff. You can leave that for.
Oh, I think I'm a little bit confused because I would say my first pose would be a butterfly. Does that count as the warm-up or can that be the first pose?
What's your purpose of your butterfly?
To do the open up the hips.
Okay. What's the final shape of your pose? That front hip then that's in what?
Cradle 4.
So it's in, sorry, the light is not great. So if your front leg is here, sorry, I'm now
Cradle 4.
turning around. Hang on. Maybe the light will be better this way. Here we go. All right. So this is your butterfly. Stretch. Where do you feel it in your butterfly?
Your hamstrings.
Not so much hammies because your knees are bent, but the inner thighs, you feel it more in your adductors, yeah?
Yes.
Do you feel anything in your glutes from butterfly? No. But your
Okay.
final pose, your flying pigeon, your leg isn't out here to the side.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Yeah. Okay.
And then it's hooking around your arm. And there's your shelf.
Yep.
What is stretching in this shape?
Hamstrings.
Nope.
What?
In our external rotation. Do it. Where do you feel it?
I feel it on the top of my thigh, so like quad.
Like here.
Yeah, but that's your hamstring, glutes.
It's your glutes. Yeah. So hammies are here.
Okay.
The back of the leg. Glutes. I think last time we were calling it like side hip bum. Yeah.
Okay.
So they're your glutes. So how can you be more efficient than butterfly?
Okay.
To stretch your glutes, you can look at your cradle 4 shapes.
Yes.
So look at all of the poses that use this shape because
Mhm.
that's what you're getting to finally.
Okay.
That's your ending point. Yeah. So if in
Yeah.
doubt, think about the shape, think about what is stretching. And really where you need that flexibility. Does that make sense, Marcel?
Yes.
Okay, cool. I'm going to leave you to it for 2 seconds. I'm going to come to the other questions. Let me know if you've got something else that you want to go over.
No.
Emily.
Hi.
Hi.
If I read through what I've got, I've just done the list. Can you tell me if I'm along the right lines or if I need to be linking some together? The other thing is, so can you kind of incorporate different things? So I put in a pigeon with cactus arms. Can you do that? So if you're sitting in a pigeon position, so you've got that back leg, you're also doing the hip extension, but the cactus arms are sort of making them more of a active arms for that sorry, it's been a long day, for the crow position. So it's sort of putting you in that, yeah. Could you say that? So I know they're sort of further on the side, but could you do cactus arms to just sort of, open the shoulders, just using active arms, or would you say not?
I would say, I mean, you could entirely do that, but I think for your pose, not really relevant because here is not the same as here.
Yeah. So would you just say seated pigeon with arms extended, or would you actually do it with your forearms down?
I would maybe just do pigeon, but I'm also wondering for your final pose, Emily, if you're doing fallen angel, do you need hip external rotation?
It was more the leg behind and then sort of getting that in that straight. So it was my second pose. So what I've done is I've done a 3-legged downward dog with opening hips, then into pigeon, where I said cactus arms, then dropping down into, no, I've done that wrong. Sorry. I went then down into dolphin with 1 leg. So how did I do that? Sorry, I've mixed this up. Then I went to side plank hand to toe. So stretching them out, then into high lunge, twisted chair, twisted low lunge, reverse moon, pyramid pose, into warrior 3 with arms forward, into standing split, curtsy squats, dropping into tripod headstand, one leg, and then I don't know what the name is on, you know, where you do a tripod headstand, but you have one knee on the back of your leg and the other arm straight, the other leg straight. So in that similar position, that's, do you know which one I mean? So you drop the knee, the one knee's on the back of the leg and the other one's up in the air on the tripod headstand.
Okay.
I just don't know the name of it. And then I went from that into, because you know then where you go into crow from your headstand,
Yep.
and then you go into crow and then into twisted crow.
Woo, that's a big one.
Or is it is that too much for that pose?
I mean, you're going to be incredibly tired by the end. I think there are definitely ways that you can get that kind of action of extension of the back leg, finding the kind of twist and squeeze in more efficient ways without tiring quite so much with the sort of headstand. I know headstand isn't a huge strength requirement. You can definitely keep it in as a kind of build up to the last part. But think more about your shape to entry, if that makes sense.
So where you go from a crow and then you put your face down and then lift the legs.
Yeah, because you're coming in from a side crow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You
And then
lower your face down.
And then the leg goes up and back behind you.
And the knee.
It's definitely a really challenging one.
Because I was trying to sort of find ones that obviously work arms, but not too much, but then also get that sort of in and out motion where you've got the hip flexion, but also hip extension as well as the twist. And so I tried to sort of group them together, but like doing it at the same time. But if you think it might be, I mean, are the high lunge, the twisted high lunges and things like that, are they good ones? And
I think so. I think finding that sort of rotation
okay,
is good.
should I do?
You can start building skill to find the shelf shape here.
So how do you write that down? Do you say about putting your arms in the crow pose, or do I not need to go into that much detail? I just say the twisted low lunge.
You can do, say, kind of revolved high lunge and then find side crow arms. You could even push down and then float the back leg up. So you're in that sort of slight rotation with the action of extension of the back leg, for instance.
How do I write those sort of things down?
Just as it is, and then if
Okay.
you want to add pictures in,
Okay.
or if it's not clear, we will ask you.
Okay. So we can kind of get creative with it, but you think I just need to do things a little, so not bother with the pigeon stuff?
I wouldn't, because you don't need hip external rotation in your final pose.
Okay. So, and things like dolphin or not? One-legged dolphin?
Not really. I think you could, because you're not working a shelf there.
You're doing it for, okay.
So, I mean, maybe you could do.
Because you can do the chaturanga push-ups where you go in and out, but I don't know whether that would be good or not if it's too much.
Yeah. The thing that I would keep coming back to is, what is the shape of your final pose?
And just trying to think.
And making those shapes.
Yeah. But in an easier way.
Yeah, in a kind of like gradually building up to it. It's the trickier your final pose, the trickier it is to sequence.
Okay.
So,
all right.
So yeah.
And things like reverse moon, good or not? Because with the leg in the air or not really, because it's not on your forearms.
Oh, like revolved half moon?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah, that could be a good one.
Is it a good one? Okay, so it's called revolve, not reverse. Sorry.
No, it's okay, because you've got a twist and you've got the action of extension of your back leg.
Yeah.
It's not
Well,
in
that's-
quite the same shape, but it's similar.
Well, it was just getting that leg out at the back in that kind of awkward angle, so I thought that might be one. Okay, I'll have another go.
Yeah, keep going, and if you're stuck, do it in your body.
Okay, so I've
Okay.
been trying to sort of go back and forth and then do them, but and then so the things like Warrior 3 with arms in front, building arm strength, but not being on the floor, also not because it's not in a shelf.
Yeah, you're gonna get
Okay.
tired standing leg, and
You need
yeah,
that.
you're not building any strength in your arms. There's no load
Okay.
in the arm.
Okay, thanks so much.
Pleasure.
Bye.
Karen, have you still got your question? Thanks, Emily.
Sorry, did you say my name now?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So I don't know, for my pose, there's some hip external rotation.
Just
So-
remind me of the pose, Taryn. Sorry.
Oh, King Pigeon.
Okay. Yes.
So I know that we're not focusing on like the warm up or like the links and flows, but I just wanted to know, like, a reclining figure 4, would that be an actual pose, or is that more of like something I would use in a warm up? Like, can that be, say, like where I start my pose?
That.
Because
Yeah.
it feels more like a warm up.
Yeah. It's sort of in that sort of territory. It might be more warm up than actual meat and potatoes stuff. Because you've only got 14 to 16 poses to get into that big shape.
Yeah. So okay. I felt like a more of a warm up.
You do want that kind of hip external rotation figure 4 shape. So if that is part of your like beginning bit, like getting into it, then you can certainly include it.
Okay, cool. Thank you. And then just one more question. Because it's obviously like a big quad stretch and a big back bend, is it okay that like fairly early on in my sequence, like I'm already in lunges?
Absolutely. You got to get
Okay.
into it.
Okay.
It's like, it's like I was saying earlier, if your end pose is like a 10, you don't have time to start at 1.
Okay.
You've got to chuck them in at like 4, 5 to get there. Otherwise, your class is going to be 4 hours long.
Okay, cool. Got it.
I mean, unless you want a 4-hour long class with, you've got clients who are really showing up.
Yeah.
But
Not
yeah.
at this point.
If your
Yeah.
peak pose is a high flexibility, high strength, high, one of those big poses, you can't start with like baby poses.
So you can kind of just like
Gotta
hit
get
the ground running and like get into
Yeah,
those
exactly. So maybe
Okay,
that's
cool.
why your reclined figure 4 is part of your warm up,
Yeah.
and then your lizard lunges into catching the back foot, pulling the heel towards you, is your part of your opening, because then you're really getting into stretching those quads for your hip extension.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Cool. I said in the room, sometimes it might be helpful to start from the end and work backwards instead of trying to work from the beginning and working forwards. It just
Mhm.
depends on you and how your brain kind of sees things and how stuff works for you. But sometimes it's easier to kind of go backwards instead of trying to go forwards. I don't know if that's helpful for anybody.
That is actually helpful. Yeah.
And I keep going back to shape, shape, shape. How do we get into the shape? And I can't stress enough for you guys, like Brenda, like you said earlier, Catherine's videos that break down the poses, watch them this weekend. it's going to help you finish the task for sure.
Sorry, which videos?
So the video is on the website.
Yeah.
Under peak pose, I think the banner is peak pose analysis. Let me just see if I've got the page open and I can tell you. So it's yoga pose analysis course, and then you've got pose analysis ABC,
Yeah.
and then underneath that, there is analysis. Catherine breaks down each pose. So there's like half an hour on crow, 15 minutes on side crow. So that will be a good one for you, Emily. Go watch the side crow video, and also watch the Ekapada Kundalini 1 video as well, Emily. That might be helpful for you too. So those videos, even if your pose isn't there, they find the ones that have the similar. Oh, and I didn't even realize, Emily, there is a fallen angel video.
Oh, okay, perfect. Then I will look at that one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So this is your cheat sheet for sure. Loads and loads of peak poses, absolutely broken down into, and Catherine says in the videos, strength requirements, flexibility requirements. These are the joint actions. Think about movements like X, Y, and Z. Think about poses like X, Y, and Z. And some of them follow on from each other as well. So it builds to like the next thing. So definitely, if it still feels like this is very daunting, watch those videos. Even if there are similar poses to your final pose and not your exact pose, what is a similar shape? Can I leave you guys for a few minutes? I just want to check in the room. Cool. All right, perfect. I'm just going to mute on this side so you don't hear all the shouting.
Yeah, you can.
Do you want your phone on you? Do you want your phone on you?
Yeah, I turned the video off. Use.
Sal,
Gonna go to my
let me just take you
question.
outside.
Oh, in my sequence, I feel the need to add crow pose, but I don't want to. So is it necessary for me to add crow pose for the
Remind me of
flying
your
pigeon?
final pose, Marcel.
Flying pigeon. Okay, let me tell you. So I would do crow pose in a lying position to get the arms stretched over the knees and work the core a little bit. But like almost my final pose going into flying pigeon is kind of like a one-legged standing chair with your leg over your knee, hook the arms, lean forward. Instead of from a crow pose, then hooking the arms, then leaning forward.
Yeah, so you'd be coming into it from your chair
Yes,
and like going down into almost like a toe stand, putting your hands on the floor and then flying your leg
Yes.
your leg back. Is that what you're saying?
yes.
Yeah. So in that way, there might be more efficient ways to find your shelf than crow. I would agree with that.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
So maybe thinking about different ways to create the exact same shape, but maybe without the full weight of that lean and lifting the back leg. Is there a way that you can add that in perhaps?
Well, what I said was, so I went like my last three poses. Malasana with hands on the floor, rounded back, chin up, and lean forward. And
Okay,
then
if
I
you're
think
not
it was,
doing crow, then you can take that out, I would say.
does it make, okay, but then this is a, yeah. I'll put crow in if it makes the flow better, but then we'll do that in the flow section.
If it's part of your transitioning, fine, maybe earlier in the sequence, but you're absolutely right. When you talk about the shape, think about the shape.
Mm.
So perhaps toe stand is a more helpful shape than Malasana.
What do you mean by toe stand? Yeah, yes. But then I was gonna do Malasana first and then go into that.
I think
Is it overkill?
I just don't think it's massively useful as in a pose by itself, Malasana. It's not really giving you the shape that you need for your final pose. If in doubt, go back to the shape of the final pose.
I know it's not giving me, but it is giving me. If my hand's on the floor in Malasana, it's getting my knees above my elbows, which is what I kind of need for the shell. And then if I lean forward, it's getting that motion.
Like this?
Yeah, and then if you put your hands on the floor, yes. And then,
So that
okay,
way then you might as well put crow in, because then you're
Okay.
actually making a shelf.
yes, okay. So then, would that would all be one movement? So is it like Malasana to crow?
If you want to put in Malasana to crow, then you group it together. it's not two different poses. And then just keep checking in with how much of that sort of arm balancing work you're doing. And is it the most efficient way of creating the shape? If you're flying pigeon, the shelf looks like this.
Yes.
Is crow the most efficient way to get to that shape?
Probably not.
It might be relevant to put it in earlier in the sequence, but you've got to look at the sequence as it progresses.
Well, I have other things that So it's confusing. Can I share my screen? No, I can't. Yes, I can. Oh, host disabled.
WhatsApp, Marcel.
Pardon?
You can send me take a picture, send me a WhatsApp.
Okay. I'll do
I'm
that.
not sure if my settings will allow you to share your screen.
I'm gonna fill in like the last few poses and then I'm gonna send you my list so you can
Okay.
see how that it looks all together.
Okay. Anybody else online have any questions? Doing okay? Feeling a bit freaked out? If I feel like everyone's having a bit of a
Yeah, totally freaked out. But you know what, Amy, I think I think what we should just do is send in our lists and you can have a look. I mean, it's not like you're gonna fail us, is it?
I think it's all about progress, not perfection. We're not
Yeah.
expecting you to have this down pat straight away.
Yeah. I'd love
So,
to. I don't think it's gonna
also why
happen.
That's also why we had so much time. That's why we
Yeah.
had today to start. And then I'm back with you on Monday afternoon to keep going on the sequencing. And then you've got a few extra days to kind of finesse things
Yeah.
and then work a little bit further. I'm going to reiterate to everybody just now, go and watch the pose analysis videos.
I'm definitely gonna do that.
100%. And if you're doing, Lana, remind me your poses, King.
Full dancer.
Full dances. So for you, like all of the ones that have that kind of shape. So watch the King Pigeon video. I'm sure there's a King Pigeon video and a full dances video. And then when you know, look at all of the things that have similar shapes. It's the easiest way to think about, okay, if this is where I'm starting, what is the shape I need to end up in? And that's why you've done your analysis. And that's also why you're sending your analysis in to me on Sunday. So I can also check and see if there's anything that's missing there that will also help.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yeah, got it.
Don't freak out. It's a learning curve, and you guys are on a super steep slope, right? Because
As long as we don't have to do the sequence for you, because then I'm really gonna freak out.
no, you don't have to do it. You don't have to be able to do it.
Okay,
Absolutely.
then I'm happy.
But Amy, I do have a question, but this is me just looking at what's ahead because you say we don't have to do it. But there's something here. Oh no, maybe. Okay, I think I might have gotten confused. There's something about a peak post video, and now I just realized it's the video online. I thought we're gonna have to make one. Don't
No,
worry.
no.
Don't
Oh,
worry,
Brenda.
that's me just being super
Watching
confused.
them online. Yeah.
I've watched it, yeah. And then I
Okay.
thought the whole time in the back of my mind, I thought we're gonna have to like make a video for you, but don't worry, you don't have to. My silly brain.
No.
Okay.
This sequence, you do not have to do it. You don't have to demonstrate it. You don't have to teach it. Your teaching all comes from either the Warrior 3, the Crow, or the Mermaid sequence. And you don't have to be able to do those poses either. You just need to be able to teach the sequence.
Can I ask you, once we have given the sequence in and you guys have analyzed it and stuff for us, will you guys tell us the possibility if we could be able to teach it? Because I'm quite happy with mine. It's quite a cool sequence, I should say. Well, I think it's a cool sequence because it's a really strong one. So will you guys just give that feedback as well, if it's possible?
Will come out in, if it's kind of like, oh, we don't, you haven't thought about the joint actions, you haven't thought about this, what about this, what about this? But it's going to ultimately be up to you if you feel comfortable teaching it.
Okay.
And if you do, awesome. And if you
Okay.
think maybe I'll hold this one in my back pocket for a little bit longer, then that's also perfect.
Okay. No, because I was quite scared with this, but as I'm doing it now, I'm like, yeah, this is pretty cool. I like this.
Awesome. I'm so glad that's how you feel.
Okay, cool. All right, thank you.
Pleasure. Marcel.
Amy. So one of the poses that I'd want to put in would be a forward fold. So so kind of like you're sitting on the floor, your legs are in like a tree pose stance, and then you forward fold. But I know that like my leg would be extending back and then going into neutral, whereas now if I'm in a seated forward fold in this shape, it's different. But can I still put that in as a...
Do you mean a sort of forward fold like this?
Yeah, yep, with the leg in.
Like that.
Yes. To kind of get the round in the back and to get this like external rotation kind of, and
Could
the
you maybe
hamstring stretch
in a figure 4?
in a figure 4.
Because then you're getting more into your glutes than if your
Okay.
foot is in tree. It might not be super comfortable for everybody,
Hmm.
but I would say that might be more efficient for what you need. You can have a little practice to find your shelf here as well. I'm giving you all the secrets, Marcel. Stop asking questions. No, I'm kidding.
What is that called?
I don't know. I'd call it a figure 4 forward fold,
Okay.
hook chaturanga arms. I don't know. It's not got a name. But that's got a little bit more relevance to the shape of your pose than just a forward fold. Maybe. I'm not sure. Have a think about it. I'm going to bring you back inside and just kind of bring the group back together. Okay. All right. Okay. Oh. Okay, coming together. Okay. Marcel, have you got another a question, or is your hand still up from
No.
last? Sorry. No. Perfect. Okay. All right. Does anybody have any burning questions? Stone is silent.
What time on Sunday is the latest we can submit?
On Sunday. But things will be marked in the order that they come into me. So if you send yours in last, please don't expect feedback by 6 a.m. on Monday morning.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. All right. So just some takeaways. for your thinking about this over the weekend. Number one, take the time to watch the pose analysis videos that are on the website. There is a wealth of information and thinking and knowledge and hints and tips in those videos. Even if your pose isn't there, there will be a pose that has similar shapes. Go watch them. Watch the pose analysis ABC videos if you've not watched them already. They're going to be very, very helpful. After that, if you're working on your sequence, think about shape. What is the most efficient way to start to create / recreate the shape of your final pose? Am I stretching the things that need to be stretched? i.e., am I becoming more flexible in the areas of flexibility? Am I building some strength? I mean, it's very hard in the sequence to actually build strength, but am I looking at what needs to be strong? And connected to what needs to be strong is always going to be what is going to tire or fatigue. Yes, if you are producing force, that is what is going to be tired. So if you're working arm balances, you're producing force through your arms to hold you up. That is what is going to tire. Yes? That's how you can look and see, is my sequence well balanced, that I'm not going to completely poop everybody out in the first 10 minutes, that they're not going to be able to have enough energy to get into the peak pose 30 minutes later. Yeah, so thinking about that, and then thinking also about the skills required, whether that is balancing, whether it is the placement of your arms or legs, whether it is your drishti, your focus, your gaze, if it's a lean, if it's a whatever it is, thinking about, are you also building skills as part of your sequence? Keep it simple. We just want the skeleton. We don't need the muscles and the veins and the nerves and the skin and the hair and the nails at this stage. We just want the bones of it. So that's why we said to you, just your 14 to 16 poses. Don't worry about your cool down. We'll get to that next week. So we've got another session on Monday to look at our sequence, our peak pose sequence. And then you've got a few extra days to also tinker and figure things out and change things if you want to before you submit to me on the 6th. So there's loads of time. But please, 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 most important, go and watch the videos. If you're in any doubt about anything to do with your pose, the answer will be in the videos. If I've not managed to answer your question today, or if there's something that you haven't thought about, there will be stuff in those videos that is going to get you to where we need to be. Any questions? Concerns, comments, things you want to share?
Will we not?
Not in the train. No, but hopefully this will be a sequence that, sorry, the question was, are we going to be teaching the sequence? No, you don't need to teach the sequence, but hopefully it will be a sequence that you will have in your yoga toolkit to take with you out into the world. Yeah, so hopefully you'll have something that you're kind of confident in. It's an intermediate to advanced kind of like thing that you feel really good about, and you know that when you feel ready to, it's sitting there in your yoga toolbox alongside the other sequences that we've given you as part of your teaching practice. So you're leaving here like super well equipped. I didn't have that when I left my hours. I had one sequence that I made, and then I had to keep building from there. So you guys are very, very fortunate. What can I say? All right, so don't worry, you don't need to teach it. Progressive. Where do you start? Easy to more difficult. And remember, the more challenging your peak pose, the higher your rating of your peak pose, the further in you're going to start on your sliding scale. Yep. So if your peak pose is a 10 in terms of mad flexibility or skills or difficulty, you can't start at 1. You got to jump in at 4 or 5 and work from there. Yeah. And it all relates back to flexibility, strength, higher skills, and that relates to what are the actions, what stretching, what do I need my body, or what does my body need to be able to make the final shape. And if in doubt, go back to shapes. And there is a lot of information in your manual from page, all of those progressive poses that we looked at for anatomy 2 might be helpful from page 181, 182. There's lots of other bits and bobs with regard to peak pose information. And in your overview, there's also your takeaways. So that distills everything into like, what do you absolutely need to know? Peak pose sequencing takeaways are on page 31. And peak pose category sequencing overview from page 28. So that breaks down inversions, all the different categories: inversions, arm balances, back bends, forward folds, hip external rotation. All of that stuff is stuff. All of that information is there. Okay, finally, just a reminder, anatomy 1, anatomy 2, plus your peak pose analysis, please by Sunday. You have my email address. Very tired yogis. Are you all okay? Yeah? Okay. Get some rest this weekend. Watch the videos lying down in bed. And yeah, we will come back on Monday, refreshed and ready to take on next week. Perfect. All right, everybody, have a beautiful weekend. Goodbye, everybody.
Thanks, Amy. Have a good weekend. Bye.
Have a good weekend, everyone.
Cheers, everyone.
Always send me a message.
Bye.